Hello, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. Well, can Trump stop the wars? What about digital ID and digital currency? Are they the threat that RFK Jr. Says they are? And what the heck is going on in London with this great banquet for Trump? Well, our good friend Harley Schlanger is one of the most astute students of current affairs and historical events as well. I look forward to chatting with him about these very important issues when we get started. So let's. Oops. Harley Schlanger, welcome back to McDuff Lives.
Hi, John. Good to see you.
And you. And well, last time we were together 2 weeks ago, we did a show and I titled it The Strategy of Tension. And I just was happy to read your most recent EIR article, that's Executive Intelligence Review, that is titled The Strategy of Tension and relates it to the Charlie Kirk event. And I think it's a brilliant article that everyone should read. You can get that at the Executive Intelligence Review, or Harley, is there a better place to link this article?
Well, if somebody wants to get a copy, I'm always reluctant because sometimes you can't find them on our website. So if someone's really desperate to read it, send me an email and I'll send it to you. So it's harleysch@gmail.com.
All right, excellent. Well, I propose that we talk about the question of whether Trump can stop these wars. Of course, he's been working very hard on the Ukraine war and on the Gaza, whatever we want to call it. I think you and I would use the word genocide, sadly. But also, I think is a big issue that's coming current again, and that is the threat of totalitarian slavery based on digital IDs, digital currency, and the constant surveillance of every aspect of our lives. So where would you like to start? I think the Charlie Kirk event and how you tied that to strategy of tension is probably a very important one. So maybe we lead with that, if you don't mind.
Sure, because they are interconnected. The idea of the strategy of tension, sometimes people try to simplify it by saying that it's when you have a false flag terror event or something like 9/11, where the government is given an excuse to have a crackdown, to silence free speech, to intimidate people with the fear they're going to be attacked by terrorists or war or something like that. It's easier to control the population under those circumstances. But the point that I made is that that's the first level on which the strategy of tension works. And we have many examples. The example I used was the Aldo Moro kidnapping in Italy in 1978, when Moro is no longer the prime minister, but was the leader of the Christian Democrats. He was trying to change some things about the government, including opening to the Communist Party of Italy, not because he liked the communists, but because he was worried about the buildup of missiles and weapons between the East and West, and he wanted to have a détente with the Soviet Union. But also, he was trying to preserve the relationship between the central bank and the finance ministry so that the government would have some control over the central bank, like the Federal Reserve, so that it would not be independent. Now, he was kidnapped. He was held incommunicado for 50-something days. It was blamed on the Red Brigades, which are a dubious construct. No one knows for sure whether they were left or right or an integration of both. But after his body was found in a I think a Fiat trunk, What happened was the idea of détente went out the window, and the central bank was allowed to break away completely from control by the finance ministry and the government. So that Italy now had a central bank very much like the Federal Reserve that acted on its own. And who are the leading bankers in Italy? They're all old oligarchs who go back to the Middle Ages and the city of Venice. So the strategy of tension was used to terrify people that there was going to be more bombings and killings and destruction, so that people lost track of the bigger issues. So the strategy of tension works perfectly to move toward a security state. Same thing with 9/11. The way Snowden writes that they use that to put through the metadata collection. And we had the case of Clapper and others denying they were keeping the data, which of course they were. So that's the interconnection between the strategy of tension and the actual move toward an authoritarian government. And so with the Charlie Kirk assassination, what was immediately put forward is left versus right, that this was an action carried out by anarchists, by Antifa, by left-wingers who were storming through the institutions and about to take over the country, which of course is preposterous. But then the left would use it to say this was going to be used to establish a top-down police state. And so you have the left and right going after each other, and they're missing the bigger picture, which is that there are things being done, including digital currencies, digital ID, suppression of free speech. This is all going on while people are looking for the profiled enemy that they think is the greatest threat to the country. And I would say the greatest threat to the country is if people don't know history, they don't know the Constitution, they don't recognize how these things are carried out, which everyone should know by now. How many of these assassinations have we had where we're told there's a lone nut who's so unbalanced that he's willing to shoot and kill someone, but apparently nimble enough and clever enough to get on a rooftop and kill somebody? So the lone assassin story is a whole part of this. And it ends up convincing people that the guy who looks a little weird in the grocery store next to you may be packing a machine gun and getting ready to shoot everyone in the store. So therefore, we need more police, we need more surveillance, and so on. So that's the basic idea of the strategy of tension.
You know, I work hard trying to foster my campaign Undo the Coup, which is the coup I refer to, of course, as the assassination of Kennedy in '63. And the strategy of tension, I think, is applicable there as with Charlie Kirk, because what did we get after the assassination was a very short, fake investigation. In fact, Hoover himself said not to investigate it. And then we had the proliferation of all kinds of theories. And these theories, you know, whether it was James Files that got shot, or a Sicilian, or a Corsican, or, you know, what angle was it shot from? What was there somebody on the railroad bridge? All of these questions have fascinated researchers for over 60 years to try to find out, you know. But I really do think that Fletcher Prouty's comments on this are the most appropriate, in that he said, you know, you're never going to find out who the actual killers were. They're just too professional. They're too well trained, and the mechanism for them to escape without being caught has been tried and true, and they're going to get away. And you're also never going to know who it was that gave the order that it be done, because these people are hidden. They're not going to make their names public. It's not going to be somebody that you have heard on the news. It's going to be people that value their privacy very highly. So what we're left with is a whole lot of detective work that doesn't really lead anywhere. And as you've emphasized, what we need to really look at is the motive. Who's cui bonus, and
And
then
who has the power to do that, including the cover up?
and exactly. So uh, and that's what they've done. And then with this Charlie Kirk thing, I mean, my goodness, they're laughing at us, Harley. They think, oh, these Americans, they'll believe anything. And so how many theories are there as to where the shooter was, who shot? Was it? All of these theories are eating up all the airspace, while the real perpetrators, the real hand behind it, go scot-free once again.
Well, let's look about what that might have been in the Kirk case. And I'm not going to put forward a theory of the assassination, but what was going on in the last weeks and months of his life was that, as we now know from a number of his friends and people he spoke to, he was going through a bit of a crisis of conscience, that he was not happy with the support for the genocide in Southwest Asia, support for Israel first. I mean, he's actually said that on several occasions. Why are we Israel first rather than America first? He apparently went to talk to Trump about his opposition to the bombing of Iran. Again, why are we at war with Iran? And so you have all these potential leads. And what we're really looking at is what's called the secret government for a reason. It's secret. It's buried under various kinds of stories, various protection. Someone who's an assassin in these things can be out of the country within an hour. So, you if you're really looking for the question who pulled the trigger, you're missing the point, because in some of these cases, and there's now studies coming out that show that there are whole, essentially assassination bureaus where they're profiling people. Like one that comes to mind is the so-called assassination threat to the Michigan governor, Whitmer, that had to do with the supposedly a gang of right-wingers who were about to kill her. What you find out is of the 11 or so people they arrested, 6 or 7 had connections to the FBI. And the people who were the most likely ones who were going to kill her were pretty unbalanced, maybe not even able to do it, but they could be chosen as the patsies like Lee Harvey Oswald. So that's how it works. Now, in the case of the Kirk assassination, there are 2 questions. One is that he was moving away from support for Netanyahu in particular. And there's a reason for that. His base, young Republicans, young conservative activists, are increasingly angry at the U.S. Blank check to Israel. The latest polls, Quinnipiac and others, are showing that 61% of 18 to 30-year-old Republican voters are opposed to continued support for Israel. Now, Kirk is obviously was a principled guy. He had certain principles. I don't agree with everything that he said, but he had certain beliefs that he fought for. And the fact that he would be very clear to pick out that his base was turning against the war, he wouldn't be blind to that. So, but it's not that that's what caused anything. It's that he was seeing changes. And I think that almost anybody can see. Let's just bring it up to date with what just happened yesterday with Trump and Netanyahu, the so-called agreement for a new Gaza pact. Now, how is this supposed to work? Who are among the people who are put on the committee that's supposed to govern Gaza? Tony Blair and Netanyahu, with Trump.
Well, it's crazy. What do they? I guess they really do think we're stupid.
Well, anyone has to. You just look at Tony Blair's history. He's one of the big mass murderers. When he was prime minister, he was constantly involved in wars and secret operation, terror acts. He's one of the people who went to George W. Bush and said, you got to go after Saddam Hussein. And they invented this whole weapons of mass destruction. There's your false flag. How many Americans lost their lives? I think almost 5,000 in the Iraq War. 5,000 Americans were killed. For what? A lie that Blair pitched and that Bush was only too happy to accept because Bush surrounded himself with a bunch of war hawks. So where's the accountability? Now, not only did Blair get away with that, he was appointed the head of the so-called quartet, which is the UN, the European Union, the United States, and one other entity, United Nations. And so what was Blair doing then? Well, it's very interesting. There's a British historian who has written a whole catalog of what Blair did. He mainly became a salesman for J.P. Morgan, and he was making $20 million a year setting up deals with Arab leaders, supposedly to create a peace agreement for the Middle East. Now, this is between, I think, 2007 and 2016. Was there peace in the region then? No. So what was he doing? He was promoting himself and he was stirring up trouble. So how do you bring Tony Blair in to this? Then Netanyahu, I mean, this is a perfect case of the wolf guarding the chicken coop. You know, and that's an insult to wolves to compare them to Netanyahu. Mm. And then Trump, maybe he intends to do things. He's the chairman of this committee. He's got his hands full right now. He's trying to do something with Ukraine. He's trying to do something with the economy. He's about to have a government shutdown. How much time will he be able to put in on this? So you've got a committee that's set up that can't do what it's supposed to do. And what's going to happen with this? I hate to say it, but it looks as though they're going to continue to destroy Gaza, make it uninhabitable, drive people off the land, even though they say they're not going to, and set up a casino resort kind of complex. And who will benefit from that? The Palestinians? No. Global casino owners, the establishment, the wealthiest of the wealthy. So this is an example of how people's eyes are taken off what they should be looking at. And instead they're trying to figure out, you know, I went to a meeting the other day and there were people who were sketching where they thought the shots came from that killed Charlie Kirk. And you had there were about 20 people there. This was a forensic class, but I was invited to talk about the strategy of tension. And the first exercise was a policeman who does this kind of work for a living, who asked people to sketch what they thought where the shot came from. And there were about 20 people who did that, and there were about 16 different examples of where it could have come from. And people spend their time on this instead of trying to figure out, why did it happen? And the other part that's even worse is many people just assume that there are all these crazy people running around who do these things. And so there's no real explanation. And so there's nothing you can do to stop it. And that's the biggest problem, I think.
And, you know, I referenced Fletcher Prouty before, and he said that to do these assassinations, it has to be a lone nut shooter. Anytime that there's any hint of a conspiracy, there's going to be an investigation, and that's going to open up the can of worms that they don't want ever opened. So that's
eventually someone will talk.
Yeah. So
but if you have one person, one patsy, you can keep them pretty much silent.
Yeah, and
as I did with Oswald.
Yeah, and I worry about this young man, Tyler. He's supposedly on suicide watch, and you know, Jeffrey Epstein was on suicide watch. No, that's not a good sign.
Well, and the question then is, what's going to come out of this? And what we're seeing are serious calls for suppression of the internet, cutting back on so-called hate speech. And you don't want to have a bunch of people running around saying crazy things, but our Constitution gives them the right to do that. But it
Yep.
gives you the right to contradict them and to argue with them. And I think it's interesting. Whatever else you think about Charlie Kirk, it appears that he was committed to the idea of a dialogue, of a discussion process. And now, in his name, to shut that down, uh, it just shows, as you say, John, they think that we're not paying attention, that they can run anything they want to by us.
Yep. And Toto really hates that, so she's barking. I think
Yeah.
she'll come down in a second.
Yeah.
Apologize for that, guys. I want to ask you about the FBI.
Okay.
Comey supposedly indicted. People are talking about, other ones. We've got, like John Brennan. All of these people, and people include Hillary Clinton. Lock them up. And the FBI now has, Christopher Wray. I mean, there's a whole litany of these people that have participated in the sorry, she's disturbing me. That are participating in distracting us from what's really going on and covering up J6.
Well, the other thing they're covering up is the overall operation that was designed to destroy Trump's first presidency.
Yeah.
The Russiagate. I mean, Trump was trying to do something. He got elected because he said we should be friends with Russia. And he was not allowed to do that, because if he made any gesture or overture toward Putin, he was accused of doing it because he's controlled by Putin, by blackmail. That was the importance of the Steele report, Steele dossier. Now, Steele was an MI6 guy. Again, he answered to Sir Richard Dearloffe, who's part of the Tony Blair network. And they're the ones who ran Russiagate. Now, it's interesting. The Comey indictment, what it really shows is that Tulsi Gabbard is trying to make the point that if you commit these crimes in the future, you're going to be held accountable. I don't know whether they're going to be able to put Comey in prison. Roger Stone, who was a victim of Comey's FBI, wrote an interesting column where he contrasted the way he was treated, the FBI showing up at 6 a.m. with bright lights, busting into his house, taking him out in handcuffs, notifying CNN so it would be on television. And he said, meanwhile, Comey was able to go into the federal building in a nice suit and tie and turn himself in. So they create the criminal idea. Now, what's interesting is that what they're saying is that Comey's indicted because Trump was out to get a vendetta, that Trump is angry and he's trying to shut down his opponents. Now, isn't that what Russiagate was? Aren't we finding out how much the FBI violated its rules, the book of rules they have? There's so much evidence, like Peter Strzok, one of the agents who was on the Crossfire Hurricane operation. What's the name of the deputy director? Anyway, there's a whole crew of these guys that were Comey's team.
Bruce Orr.
Yeah. And they were also overlapped with Hillary Clinton, but they were also overlapping with British intelligence. And there's not much that's being said about that. And I'm hoping that Tulsi Gabbard will trace it all the way back to where it started, because the whole story of the Russian hacking didn't come from the U.S. National Security Agency or the Cyber Protection Security Operation in the United States. It came from Britain. Someone, in fact, his name's escaping me. Anyway, he was
Steele?
Hannigan.
Okay.
Hannigan was the head of the GCHQ. He now works for private security companies that are government and private partnerships. And what are they doing? Suppressing free speech. So this is where you see the inbreeding of the corruption, and that's really what Russiagate was about. So I find it. I was looking at the Associated Press and New York Times, their coverage of the Comey indictment, and all they talked about was Trump trying to shut down his enemies. Nowhere did they raise the question of, wasn't Russiagate an effort by people who opposed what Trump was trying to do and used illegal methods like lying to Congress, lying in the FISA report to get wiretaps, to trail after Carter Page and others. Why was that not part of it? Well, that's who controls the media.
Yeah, I was going
But
to
it
get
does tell you, John, it does tell you that there is a network that does that it's not paranoid or conspiratorial thinking to track down the connections between someone like Hillary Clinton, the law firm that she hired, that hired the computer security, cybersecurity company that lied about being hacked. And they later admitted, CrowdStrike, the president, Sean Henry, admitted they had no evidence that there was a hack. Mm-hmm. And that was before the Congress. And yet Adam Schiff runs around telling everyone Russia hacked it. They did it on behalf of Trump. So, the story comes out eventually, but it comes out in a way that's so skewed and not completely coherent, so that you end up getting away with it. And that's the problem. So I think Tulsi Gabbard should continue. She should trace it all the way back to the City of London. And if Comey goes to jail, that's okay.
Harley, I have to ask you to excuse me a second. I'm going to go see if I can get Toto to calm down.
Well, that was pretty good.
Marsh has gone out, so I have techniques. Don't worry. No, just pulling the shades is the main thing. Everything that goes by deserves to get barked at, according to Toto's rules.
Uh-huh.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt our conversation, but thank you for digging into the FBI with me a little bit. And you mentioned
McCabe, by the way, was Andrew McCabe was the name I was looking for, the deputy director to Comey. When they asked McCabe about it, he was somewhat wishy-washy in his defense of Comey, because I think he's worried about his own potential indictment. But they took what they knew was a false document, the Steele report. They took it to the FISA court to get wiretap capability on not just on Carter Page, but on the whole Trump operation. And why doesn't the New York Times, the newspaper of record, why doesn't the New York Times report that when they talk about Comey? Now, the other person you mentioned before, Brennan, I'm told that he's got a whole team of lawyers lined up, and he's complaining that he's not a rich man. It's hard for him to do that. What's he going to do? Get a GoFundMe to protect him as the former chief spy of the United States? I think Brennan, especially, what would be interesting would be when you get him on for deposition, talk to him about what he did with Obama with their Tuesday lunch meetings, where they put together a list of people to be hit with drones in the Middle East. There's what these guys are afraid of is the discovery process. Now, that's why it's so important that this be allowed to be played out, because there's so much that we need to discover about how this secret government works.
Speaking of Brennan in particular, yesterday I watched Tucker Carlson's first part of a series that he promises on Monday nights
9/11.
on 9/11. If you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend it because he really puts the screws to Brennan for for his service at the American embassy in
Yeah.
Riyadh, and letting the terrorists do whatever they wanted to do. His theme seems to be headed towards. They thought they had it under control, but but then they lost control, and the bad guys were able to do the bad guy thing. A story I'm not sure I buy, but he's revealing a lot of stuff, and he has a huge following. So I think it's important to keep an eye on that, because that could, if you know Brennan could go down on that, and then the whole scheme, all of these guys, hopefully. I'd like to see it, but this is all, unfortunately, just partisan stuff. I mean, if we had an independent judiciary, an independent FBI, an independent DOJ, then all of this stuff would be already cleaned up and over with. But it is that, I think dialectic is another word I've been focused on lately. And
Mhm.
the two-party system is a dialectic system, problem, reaction, solution. And just the idea that we have to live under the rules of the two-party system itself boxes in the citizens to having to just make one broad choice of, I think these people are a little bit better than those people, or a lot better than those people, but
Or a little less corrupt.
are a little less corrupt. And that of course is the real pitch right now for the Democrats, is that I don't care how bad a Democrat is, you'll never get as bad as Donald Trump. You'll never get that bad. So just vote blue and don't worry about it. And that I hope they're getting sick and tired of that. Kamala Harris's loss may have clued them in, but just like we talked about the digital identity problem, I don't see the base of the Democratic Party aware of it. They're all just mesmerized by TDS. Is that still the case?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you listen to the responses to the Comey indictment, and it's all, well, Trump's a fascist. Trump's establishing the fascist state. And as I said, no one said that about what was done when Trump was attacked. And I'm not necessarily defending Trump. I'm defending the rule of law.
Yeah.
The fact that you have laws that have to be enforced on both parties or all parties. But John, I'll just say one thing. Sitting here in Europe where we have multiple parties, having more parties doesn't mean you get better parties. You look at the situation in Germany, and the one party or the two parties that are somewhat distinct, the left party of Sarah Wagenknecht and the Alternative for Deutschland, they are very much focused on ending the Ukraine war. And the irony is they're being called fascist because they want to stop the fighting. And meanwhile, the people who are the real fascists are the ones who are defending the Ukrainian government, which is killing off its own population by continuing the war. So, the real solution to all these things is we have to tackle the problem of not just disinformation, but lying, changing the story of what really happened. And if you go back and look at World War II, for example, how many people know that the British were involved, top level people in the British oligarchy were involved in bringing Hitler to power? With Americans, the Harriman family, the Bush family, Prescott Bush, the father of one president and the grandfather of another. Prescott Bush was part of the Harriman Bank that loaned a lot of money to Hitler. Now, why would that be the case? Well, because they were with the British, and this is also the Dulles networks, that wanted to see a war between Germany and the Soviet Union. And so they propped up Germany in such a way that Germany could be deployed against the Soviet Union. And they didn't think about the fact that the Germans might move west first. So, these are miscalculations, but the story in history is clear. One of my associates, I think you may have interviewed him before, Tony Chaikin.
Oh, yes, Tony.
Yeah. Tony went to the National Archives and dug out the documents which showed that the U.S. government seized the Harriman Bank under Trading with the Enemy Act. And he went there, he got them, he wasn't able to copy them, so he's going to go back. And he went back a few weeks later, and they were now closed off. You couldn't get the documents. So they protected the American pro-fascist cartels. And so how many people think that the United States had anything to do with the Nazis? The other thing the Harrimans did, they were part of the American Eugenics Society, which is this idea of trying to promote the idea of genetic superiority of not even just white people, but of aristocrats. And they had a conference in New York City in 1931 on U.S. laws that were being passed to along the lines of eugenics to keep the so-called undesirables out of the United States. Now, who was there? Wall Street and a gang of Nazis from Germany. The person who eventually wrote the Nazi laws, the race laws, came to the United States and he said, how I wish we had the freedom that you in America have to pass these laws. Why don't people know that? The Harrimans were supposedly the liberals in the Democratic Party. The Bush family, supposedly the liberals in the Republican Party. These were hardcore pro-Nazi racists. And so, the people don't know the history.
They don't know the history, and they don't want to know the history because they're just so wedded to the idea that they are right. They're right. If you're right, you're right. And so why study history? It's so frustrating for me. And you mentioned the Harrimans, and I'm going to do a show or a series, Meet the Harrimans, and because it's very important. What you just said, it's really, really important because this shows, that there is over above the political system a uniparty, and that this uniparty can work for the continuation of the existing wealth of the aristocracies of Europe and the corporate moguls of America and the bankers of the city of London. And it just goes on. And that is the big money that you talked about earlier that could finance not only the assassination of Kennedy, but the cover up that went on forever and ever and still going on. This
Averell Harriman,
yeah.
He comes from the Harriman Railroad
Right.
Company.
E.H. Harriman.
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, I think his second or third wife was Pamela Churchill Harriman.
That's right.
From the Churchill family.
Yeah.
And Harriman was known he was the so-called liberal governor of New York at one point. And he was extremely influential in undermining the Democratic Party after World War II through support for NATO, support for the division of the world into two empires. And he was very close to even though he was supposedly a political opponent of the Dulles brothers, his politics were pretty much the same, as was it John McCloy who was the CIA director? Or McCone? McCone, yeah. These are all bankers.
Yeah. And connected to J.P. Morgan.
Yeah.
And that means, they're ultimately the string puller, that pulls the strings from behind the shadows is probably sitting in the city of London somewhere.
I wouldn't say probably. I would say definitely. And, in the article I wrote on the special relationship, I don't know if you had a chance to read that one yet.
No, I haven't.
It's on, I think it's titled something like Theater in London, Trump, King Charles, and the Special Relationship. Now, this had the banquet. There was this huge, long table. And who was sitting around the table? Silicon Valley and British tech people. The ones who are doing the spying, who are working with the Israelis on the various spy operations, the Pegasus and so on. And who else was there? Peter Thiel from his company, Palantir, which is one of the leading, metadata collection agencies, but also Silicon Valley has become the military now. And supposedly the cool guys who are doing AI and everything else to protect us, they're operating to make sure that we never learn the truth about things. And Palantir is run by Peter Thiel and Alex Karp. These are people who are very proud Aristotelians. And an Aristotelian is essentially someone who says you can't really know the truth. You just can work on connectos. And you can always use connectos to mislead people. So we're dealing with an intelligence establishment which is moving toward the most advanced surveillance and protection of the surveillance capability. In fact, in Europe now, they're working with Google, with who was there? It was Google, Microsoft, all the AI companies went with Trump to the banquet. And what was the banquet about? The great special relationship between the British and the Americans. And Trump, in his speech, and we know he didn't write the speech because he stumbled over it. He had a hard time reading the speech. He should have ripped it up, because what it said is that the British tradition of John Locke and Thomas Hobbes and Adam Smith is the great tradition of freedom that we in America share.
Oh, my.
And then he said that the world owes a great debt to the British Empire. And wherever the Union Jack flew, there was peace and development and a better world.
Oh.
Now, that was his speech. That was his toast. As though people there didn't know that the American Revolution was fought precisely against those people. That America became a strong economy because Hamilton fought against the outlook of Hobbes and Locke and Adam Smith.
But Trump should know better.
Well, he should, because he talks about the American system. I have a feeling that speech was handed to him right before he had to give it.
So,
because that's the way they do that sometimes. The guy who supposedly wrote it is someone from the American Enterprise Institute that was a protege of Newt Gingrich. Not exactly a towering intellect.
So a lot of people are still putting their hope on Trump, that Trump's going to defeat the deep state, that Trump's going to return America to the American dream, to the promises of the Constitution and the founding fathers, and that if people believe that, is that just because they're been fooled and they've had to choose Trump against the other people, or is there any chance that it's true that he really is going to defeat the deep state? Any chance at all?
Well, we'll know pretty soon, because he's switched his positions on Ukraine a couple of times.
Yeah.
Now, I cover that in the special relationship paper. One of the things that people are saying in Europe was that Trump first said, Ukraine still can win, and it's going to be up to you and the NATO and the European Union to make that happen.
Yeah.
And so the E3 countries, Germany, France, and Britain, they were going, yay, Trump changed his opinion, and King Charles changed his opinion. And then they read it more carefully, read the Truth Social tweet more carefully. And what they realized is that he's washing his hands of Ukraine. He's saying, we'll sell you weapons, you can provide them the weapons, but we're not going to be involved in this. And so he basically was acknowledging on some level that Ukraine was unwinnable, that it's going to be sooner or later, it's going to collapse. And now the blame will be on Starmer, Macron, and Merz. And so the Europeans who initially were cheering this were upset. Now, this fits into this belief that people have that Trump is playing 5D chess
Right.
against people playing Chinese checkers. Now, I've seen some of his statements which show that he does have a strategic point of view. I think he really is opposed to the idea of war, endless war, and American taxpayers paying the money for it. I think he has a legitimate beef about NATO and the European Union. Not just that they're not paying things, but that they're creating wars that don't have to be there. But he could say that. He could say, we're not going to work with NATO anymore because NATO is for the war hawks. The last time he did something that direct was in 2018 when he had his first meeting with Putin in Helsinki, when they just had a one-on-one meeting. And afterwards he came out and he was asked, how can you meet with Putin? He doesn't agree with you on things. And Trump said he trusts Putin more than he does his own intelligence establishment. Now, he should have built on that. He should have shown why. But he just left it as a provocative statement. And it was turned against him in a way that made him seem like he might actually be a puppet of Putin. Now, I would say that's wrong. He does have certain views that are potentially useful, but you've got to follow them through. And here's the perfect example. How can he trust Netanyahu to be on this new committee to establish a Palestinian state when Netanyahu said there will never be a Palestinian state? When Netanyahu has been busy killing off every Palestinian he could, how do you expect the Arab world to trust you? And the whole idea of the Abraham Accord. The reality is that the Arab world no longer trusts the West. They still have a lot of connections to the West, but look, the Saudis just signed a deal with Pakistan so that the Pakistan nuclear weapon is the defense umbrella for Saudi Arabia. That's a huge shift. It's also, you have Iran and Saudi Arabia patching things up because of the intervention of China. So there's the whole shift in world alliances. And we don't hear about it because we're hearing about, did Charlie Kirk really love Netanyahu? Did he really love Israel? Is it really the socialists who killed him? So that's how the strategy of tension works. You don't have the ability to concentrate on what are the real strategic imperatives defining the policy.
Great Britain. I follow Craig Murray, the Scottish diplomat and commentator, is very, very, very active on these issues, and he posted a comment, a picture. You see a picture of all these British people with their wrapped in the St. George flag, and the British flag, and they're putting the English flag everywhere. You're putting it on manhole covers, putting it on telephone poles. They're putting it everywhere, and this is appears to me to be a movement, a grassroots movement of people who have had enough of the immigration being forced down their throats, and are nationalists and just want to let England be England again, or something like that. But what Craig Murray's comment was, these people are fascists. And I said, wait a minute, how do you know they're fascists? Do they self-identify as fascists? Well, of course they don't. Well, then that just started a huge train of people making comments, because, hey, I'm American. I don't live in England. I don't know what's really going on. I'm just seeing what it looks like to me. but Craig Murray calls them fascists, and it took a while for me to figure out why. And the answer is Tommy Robinson.
Yeah.
That Tommy Robinson is leading these marches, and so and then Tommy Robinson has a history of being kind of in Israel's pocket in some way.
Well, not in some way. That's important. Mike Robinson, who's the editor of the UK column, who often joins us at the Manhattan Project on Saturday,
Okay.
has written extensively about Tommy Robinson being funded by leading Zionists in Great Britain. Why? Anti-Muslim. He's
And
appealing to the anti-Muslim sentiments on the immigration question.
and why is what just bothers me is that all these people who I think are grassroots, good-hearted English people want to come out and protest against what they see as an intolerable situation with regard to immigration, and they get labeled as fascists. This is gaslighting on a huge scale, is it not?
Well, and the deeper issue there is that why are there so many immigrants right now? It's because of the policies of the City of London and the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, and also the military policies. We go in and destroy a country, and if people want to survive, they risk their lives jumping in these inflatable boats that, how many people are drowning in the Mediterranean trying to get away from these failed nations that fail because they were controlled by the international banks. So you create the problem, and then you say the solution is let's build a wall and keep them out. And that's not the solution. And the other problem is that the British economy is a rust heap right now because it hasn't had an investment policy. Its policy has been to continue the imperial looting, the predatory policy where you go in and you use the IMF to squeeze every pound you can out of a nation. So now you have these global South nations that are standing up saying, we're sovereign. We want our sovereign rights. Well, if Tommy Robinson's really for sovereignty, he should support the sovereign rights of the Libyans and of the Chadians and the people from Niger and those countries, and help them defeat the imperial forces that are funding his movement. So this is where if you peel the onion a little bit, LaRouche said real intelligence work is peeling an onion, but also working on your own character, your own sense of what it means to be human and function as a leader in a republic. And we don't have that. We have popularity contests shaped by corrupt media, and the media is part of the cartel.
Absolutely part of the cartel. And yeah, I did a show recently on a presentation by Professor James Vaughan of the University of Chicago, who talked about how the British East India Company killed the goose that laid the golden egg in India. There was a existing economy. It was productive. People were, having productive lives, and it had a surplus, and they were able. The British East India Company was able to do trade with them to a profit, to a huge profit. But when they came finally with Clive, I think it was, and then they went and it just took over. They got this thing. What is it called? The Diwali, I think, that says that you can now collect taxes and keep the taxes, and you can have an army here. Well, that just created the monster that raped India to the point where they were no longer getting any money out of India. And then this is the model that I think we have to be afraid of in the United States and in Great Britain and everywhere in Europe, is that they don't care. They'd rather have the cash now than have the cash cow that be productive forever. That, I think, is the real fear, is that really, and when they get their digital IDs everywhere and the satellites beaming on us 24/7, which they probably already have, we are slave. We are enslaved, and we are expendable. And Bobby Kennedy is right. We have got to resist. I have to say that.
Well, it's true. And the resistance has to be based on the principles of a republic, that you can have a scientific evaluation of what adds to the real wealth of an economy. And if your idea is an Adam Smith free market, or Thomas Hobbes, the law of the jungle, then you justify an imperial policy which steals from other nations. But if you're a Republican, and I mean with a small r, not Republican Party, then you believe that every nation and every people have a right to the raw materials of their country, to the fruits of their labor, and that should be encouraged as an alliance among sovereign states. That's what's missing. And that's what's missing from Donald Trump. His idea of America first really leaves out the whole question of what the United States has done as an ally of the British Empire to destroy a lot of these countries.
Yeah, America first it's never been a successful slogan because the powers like the Harrimans and the allies of the British banking system, the Wall Street allies, won't. They don't profit from him. Was it Benjamin Franklin that said that merchants don't have a country, something like that. That if you're in business, then you do business wherever you want to do business or can do business, and that idea of the economic system just being lifted out of the political system, which is where we started with the Aldo Moro. The reason that they created that and the Red Brigades and all that strategy of tension, as you indicated, and I think needs to be emphasized, was to take control of the economy away from the government.
And the same thing happened with Kennedy, with the Executive Order 11110 in June of '63, when he created Treasury notes to replace Federal Reserve notes. And what happened to Kennedy? So these are things people need to know, and they get some of it from what you're doing. We put out regular material on this. It's time for Americans to learn our history, especially because this is the year coming up of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And I would urge people, read the Declaration of Independence. Become clear on what America really represents.
Yep, and carry one of these around with you. The Constitution of the United States. Harley Schlanger, what a great time it has been for me. I've learned a lot, and I hope everybody else did too. Harley Schlanger, the LaRouche Organization and the Schiller Institute, broadcasting from Potsdam, Germany. Harley, it's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. See you soon.
All right. Bye, everybody.